Okay, we are live. Well, welcome to another episode of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Ballin. We have a returning guest and a very good friend of mine, Tarik LaCour. So, thanks again, Tarik, for joining us. It's been a while.
Robert, it's always fun to be back, and it's been too long. So we've been planning to do this for so long. I don't know why it took this long, but
Well, if
good
the,
to be
if the
back.
B theory of time is correct, it already took place.
Well,
Anyways.
exactly. So I guess we're for some of us are waiting and some of us aren't, but we'll get to
Well,
that.
us atheists there. But you've been on the podcast before, and you're a very good friend. But maybe like for those who are tuning in for the first time or do not know much about you, like how about you just like give a brief introduction to yourself?
All right, my name is Tarik LaCour. I'm a PhD student in philosophy and a master's student in ecology, evolution, and behavior at the University of Texas at Austin. So I'm finishing up my dissertation now. And also, I work in the Phelps lab where we work on animal behavior, working on rodents and things like that. So I have interest in philosophy of science, philosophy of biology, and philosophy of mind. Space and time, actually, you'd think that's just philosophy of physics or just physics proper, but has lots of crossover. Philosophers of mind are very interested in the nature of time and space because the mind is located in time and space and how it interacts with the rest of the world. So a lot of crossover there. And general philosophy of science has lots of interest in physics as well, since physics is a paradigmatic science. So I've long been interested in time and space, and that continues to this day. Or I
No, that's
guess,
perfect.
or if the B theory of time is right, that's always been that way. So nothing to explain.
Okay. Well, we are going to be discussing the A and B theories of time. But before we kind of do that, like, how about you just give the definition? Like, is there like any general definition of time that both sides of the debate would agree with? Or how would you define it?
It's really hard to define time because we all experience it. We all know what it is. But as St. Augustine would said, if someone asked me what it is, I have no idea. Um, one person said time is what keeps everything from happening all at once. That's actually not a bad definition. Um, if you take, relativity realistically, then you would say time is a dimension of the universe along with space. Um, are If you are a relationist about time, you would say time is how you separate event A from event B. So if there's no events going on, there's no time. Uh, or if you think time is itself a substance, you might think that time is just like space, but different, but somehow connected to and interacting with it. But in short, there's no universally accepted definition of what time is. But for the most part, when you talk about time, people can more or less follow what you're saying. Philosophers of time, anyway.
Okay, that is pretty good. So, some of these versions like be general questions because this is going to be like a general overview of this podcast because it can be like a very dense, complex topic. But
You
so
could write several dissertations on time and you would have only scratched the surface.
that's true. So we're not going to do that today. But well, there's like different theories of time. Like the two main theories are like the A and B. So like, how would you give a definition of the A and B theories of time?
Okay, well, the first thing to say is that the A and B theory of time are type of they're cluster, they're kind of big tent overviews. But the main point is the A theory thinks that time is dynamic, that temporal becoming is real, that things come into being and pass out of being, and that the present is objectively real and distinct from the future and the past. Now, some atheists would say, they're called presentists, they think the only thing that exists is the present. The past is no longer here, the future is only potential. Some atheists will say the past is real, the present is real, the future is yet to be. So the key thing for atheists is they think the present moment is real and that time is dynamic. So a lot of people would even call the A theory the dynamic theory of time because temporal becoming is real. That's a really big thing for A theorists. B theorists or static views of time will say that there is no objective distinction between past, present, and future. They're all equally real. It's just that you're only subjectively present, no pun intended, in the present. So you don't recognize that the future and the past are just as equally real as the present moment. So that's what B theorists will say. They'll say that past, present, future all equally real, and there's no and that time there is no objective temporal becoming. Most people. There are some B theorists who think that temporal becoming is real, but but they still would say that the past, present, and future are all equally real. So that the big thing for B theorists is past, present, future, no objective distinction between them. It's just like, think of it this way. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and you're in Utah, right? Yes. So for me, here is Texas, but for you, here is Utah. So they would say just time is that way. So the present is just the fact that you happen to be there, but there's no objective now, just like there's no objective here. So that's their that's the distinction between the A and the B theory.
Okay. And when like say historic Latter-day Saint understandings, like historical Latter-day Saint theology, and so like, LDS thinkers, um, have there been like a predominant view, or has there been like any debate as to like say which LDS fall under?
You know, Latter-day Saint theology is sporadic. Obviously, you have some very defined theologies by B.H. Roberts, Orson Pratt early on, and then not as much in between until. But I don't know that they would say exactly that they were A or B theorists, although I think you could make a pretty good case um, that most, especially Roberts and Pratt, I would say are probably A theorists because of their belief in libertarian freedom and also their uh, kind of open view of the future. If you think the future is open, then you'd have to be some type of an atheist. So I think that's probably the theological, the philosophical, historical view. I would say lay Latter-day Saints because they will read things in the scriptures and not super critically analyze them, but they seem as though, God has sees all things past, present, future. There are certain overtones there and the Book of Abraham, Bible, and other places. So lots of Latter-day Saints probably would be B theorists since they think God knows all things, and that would include the future as well. So
You've mentioned like say the issue like say the libertarian freedom and stuff like that. So would it be fair to say if you hold to an A theory of time, you can accommodate libertarian freedom, but if you hold to a B theory of time, there might be like some issues when it comes to that.
um in and of itself, the B theory is compatible with libertarian free will because the B theory says the future, the past, and the present are equally real, but they don't say that that causal determinism is true. So to be a libertarian about free will, you have to deny causal determinism and affirm free will. So that's all you need. That you can be an A or B theorist and be a libertarian. There are other reasons why certain libertarians, if they're open theists like yourself, like Blake Ostler, they for those reasons, the A theory would have to be the go-to there. But libertarian freedom, I believe, is compatible with the B in the A theory. Although, to be fair, I think most B theorists are probably going to affirm causal determinism. Not necessarily, but many of them do. And so they'll be compatibilists or hard determinists.
For something outside, like say the LDS context, because I'll ask you this within the LDS context. When it comes to say the A theory of time, what do you think are like the advantages or the pros of it? What do you think are the disadvantages or some of the difficulties of the theory of time? And I'll ask you the same for the B theory afterwards.
Sure. The advantage of the A theory is it affords what Peter Godfrey Smith, a philosopher of science, it accords with what we'd call common sense realism. You and I experience the present. We don't experience the past or the future. So that view of time is just commonsensical. Of course, it's true. It's the way we experience things. It also has the advantage of, when we talk about time, we even when we are just talking within a sentence, time is the most referred to thing, and it seems as though we adjudicate between the future and the past and the present as being different. So that's kind of the irreducibility of tense. Um, so it has that going for it, and straightforwardly, um, it there's nothing in you certainly the other I guess another thing that's important, you certainly can be a consistent atheist with general and special relativity. General relativity doesn't compel, or in special relativity don't compel you to be an atheist. I think they're more supportive of the B theory, but they're certainly consistent with what modern science tells us.
Okay, and for the B theory of time, what do you think are the pros and cons?
Well, like I said, the A theory of time gives us accords more with common sense, but science lends more towards a B theory. The special theory of relativity, which is the theory of time, so general relativity is the theory of gravity. There is no distinction between past, present, and future in the theory. So they would just say, well, if we take a straightforwardly realist approach to physics, which is the world is what our physical theories say, and special relativity is our best theory of time, then we would say there's no distinction between past, present, or future. Also, so that would be the main thing. Also, it just seems that general relativity doesn't exactly make you think this, but the way that gravity curves and things like that, it makes it seem as though we're in more of a kind of a block universe. So that would make it seem as though space and time are on a continuum if general relativity is right. So that would give more constants to a B theory. So, as Heather Dyke would say, the A theory of time, its biggest pro is common sense. The B theory is what science and physics would lend us to believing is the right view.
Okay, and when like saying LDS context, who have been like the main LDS proponents of the A theory of time, as well as like the non-LDS proponents of this, and what have the justifications for their perspective been? You can mention like libertarianism and so forth, but like
Um,
LDS, non-LDS, like how have they approached this?
Blake Ostler, in his book, The Attributes of God, he talks about the B theory of time, and he says, there are scriptures that you could read in a B theory way. So he's very generous to that. But he says if repentance requires real change, that you go from a person who is this way and you change your nature, and that requires real objective change. And if the B theory is true, then you don't really change. You just go from one place on the space-time curve to another place. And, that slice of you in that block is, it stays there versus, so in one sense, the past is never really behind you. It's always ever present in a way. So for him, he would say repentance really isn't possible on the B theory. Um, since people like B.H. Roberts would also say that since God doesn't know the future, that would seem to imply that must be because it's the future isn't present, so or isn't real. So that would also be a reason for holding to the A theory. There there haven't been a ton of people writing on that. Um, from the Latter-day Saint perspective. Outside the Latter-day Saint perspective, William Lane Craig, he's written several books on this, very strong proponent of A theory, and his point is that we live in and experience the present, and there's no reason to really deny that experience. And he also thinks that because you don't have to interpret relativity theory in Einstein's way, so actually, let's take a step back. So the theory of relativity as you have it now is the Einstein-Minkowski theory. So when Einstein gave his original theory of relativity, he gave space as three-dimensional, which is just like Newtonian space and time. When Minkowski came around, he said you can actually give a better interpretation if you take space and time to be the same thing and you make it the universe four-dimensional, like a block. And that's what Einstein later adopted. So that's actually Minkowski's view, that later view. Einstein's original view did have a distinction between past, present, and future. So for that reason, and for people like H.A. Lorentz, who also held to that space and time and past, present, future were objectively distinct, he would say you can give interpretations of relativity theory that don't imply, therefore, that uh, past, present, future aren't distinct. So those are kind of the main arguments. I will say the overwhelming consensus among physicists and among philosophers of time is the B theory. I think on Phil Paper's survey, it's about 87% of philosophers are B theorists, and all the physicists I know are all B theorists. I've not met any relativist who is a theorist. So, but to be fair here, that doesn't mean that it's true. It's just that's the consensus, more or less.
Yeah, but like unlike a certain TikToker, just because there's a consensus doesn't mean you have to be dogmatic.
Yeah, I mean, but the other thing, this is another thing for A theory that's important. So we don't yet have a theory of how to unify quantum mechanics with relativity theory. So one of the options could be that general relativity is wrong, and we know to some extent that it is because it clashes with quantum mechanics, which is a more justified theory. So for that reason, you may have a different theory of space and time. You have a quantum theory of space time. And when you have that, you might be able to restore a distinction between past, present, future, and have absolute simultaneity and things like that. So that's another thing. It's just science may change, and it certainly will because we already know that these two theories are in conflict. So both of them can't be right. So they're going to have to be changed, and that may change and restore uh, a just a privileged present, so to speak.
What do you think that there's like such a consensus amongst philosophers for the B theory of time?
Probably because most philosophers of time and those who've been writing about it have been B theorists. You think of people like Jack Smart. One of the first like great books on philosophy of time was The Direction of Time by Hans Reichenbach, who was a logical empiricist. He was a B theorist of time. And many science popularizers are B theorists too. And so if you don't read like the technical physics, if you read more of the popular level books, they're going to give you a strong B theorist bent. So that's probably why. And I think since scientific realism is also very popular, which is the view that you should take the world to be a science, our best scientific theories tell us it is. Straightforwardly, they would just say, okay, well, there's no present in special relativity, so we're going to make that an ontological claim. That's the way the world really is, independent of our minds. And also, I'll be fair, just to be fair here, the B theory allows for time travel, and it's a sexier theory, so that may get people to like it too. Like, for example, if the A theory of time is right, then, Back to the Future is impossible, for example. So all time travel assumes the B theory of time is right.
Now I'm conflicted because I'm a huge fan of the original Star Treks, but I'm an A tier, so I'll have to rethink that just for that.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a good reason to be a B
I'm,
theorist, but I'm sure some people have done it. I mean, let's be honest. People can sometimes can be drawn to things because they're more exotic. They sound sexier. So and
uh,
like it is kind of mind-boggling to think that time could be the way the B theory tells us it is. But
and I don't think it'll be too much of a surprise, but like, which tier do you prefer?
I'm a very strong B man. So I
Okay,
think that
so you can actually. Oh, go ahead.
I that's not to say that I don't think the A theory is defensible or that you can't be an A theorist and be scientifically respectable. I just think uh you know special and general relativity are in my mind are actually uh even more, I think, have a stronger foundation than quantum theory even. So I tend to lean towards that. So I'd lean towards the B theory very much.
I know that's good. So you can actually go as long as you want. Like, but what were your main justifications, whether it be philosophical or scientific or scriptural, or the B theory of time? And also, how would you respond to our mutual friend Blake Oster's critique of theory in Volume One of his
Okay,
experimental
so
criticism?
let me make sure I got what are my justifications for the
Yeah,
B
yeah,
theory?
yeah.
Okay, well, let's start with theological since we haven't talked about that much. So I think in order for a being to be divine, they have to know all truth, know and believe only all truths, and all truth would include truths about the future. So I think God would need to know the future, and therefore, the future would have to be real in some sense. So that would lean towards the B theory. So on theological grounds, I think that makes more sense. Uh, Scientifically, like I've already said, I think that the special theory of relativity gives us good justification for thinking that past, present, and future are equally real. And yeah, and it's perfectly consistent, I think, with a relationist view of time, which is that, time, I don't think time is a substance. I think time is a relation between events. And so as long as there are things going, there's time. So there you go. That's that. So those would be my main justifications for the B theory on relativistic grounds. I think it's justified. And I, yeah, and I don't, and I'm suspicious of grounding ontology on common sense because common sense doesn't have a way of correcting itself where science does. So I think science should be our guide to metaphysics, as it were.
Okay, and I'm sure some will wonder about this, and this is not like a theological debate, just like it's out to you. With respect to the theological justification you gave, how would you respond to someone who would say, how is that compatible with, like, say, the traditional reading of the kinfolk discourse, where God began as a intelligence, became a man, and then exalted to divinity? That seems to be like a theory, not a B theory of time, and also related to, like, understand, like, say, the nature of human free. God knows the future. Not necessarily
Well,
like in a determinate sense, but like he just knows how it's going
oh, sure. I mean, well, we'll do another podcast on the King Follett sermon. That's a very big issue. But on its face, it doesn't, it's not that on the B theory things don't happen. You can certainly say at this point in the timeline, God isn't fully God. God evolves on that side. So, in a way, it allows for God to always have been God and simultaneously not to have been God because they've all been that way the entire time. No pun intended. Um, it is deeply counterintuitive, though. I would agree with that. What you had another point about not the King Fault discourse. What was the other question?
to. Oh, human free will. Um,
Oh,
no,
free will.
I'm not saying like if God knows the future ipso facto, that's determinism, or his foreknowledge
Right.
causes it. But like, how would you get around, like, say, the common objection, like some open theists would argue, like, well, if God knows
Well,
the future exhaustively, you can't have like a libertarian freedom. And many people would argue, and I would agree with, like, not releasing scripture and theology requires some type of libertarian freedom.
well, I would agree with my open theist friends that if B the B theory of time is going to conflict at least with a common sense notion of libertarian freedom, because I would think uh, if for libertarians they think that the future mostly is open, that they can change it. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. It's indeterminate. So yes, I could see that. If you're a B theorist, you'll either have to be an indeterminist and say, well, it's there but indeterminate. Not exactly sure what that means, but technically, philosophically, and scientifically consistent. As I'm not a libertarian myself, this isn't as big of an issue for me as I'm not fully going to say I endorse causal determinism. I think that's due to quantum mechanics an open question because we don't have a full theory of quantum theory, but or rather, we don't know which interpretation of quantum mechanics is right. There's many different interpretations. So I don't want to, headstrongly say we know for a fact that determinism is true, but I would lean towards determinism being true. But even if it wasn't, I would say free will is compatible with determinism or indeterminism. So that's not a problem for me.
No, that's fine. We do actually have a question that was submitted from the chat. It's from Sue. So thanks for tuning in, Sue. So given that God has the present, past, present, and future before him, which theory would that be? And I think that would be just the B theory of time.
That would be a
Yeah.
theory. Yeah.
And does that
Um,
jive with these eternal laws?
Yeah, I mean that's what eternalism would say, would be something like that. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky for Latter-day Saints versus traditional Christians. Or we'll say creedal Christians. For creedal Christians, God created everything, and God can be outside of it. So it's very easy to see how God could see, and I'm using the word see here in a sense that doesn't exhaust God, because God isn't seeing things because he doesn't have eyes and things like that. But uh, since God is outside of time and causing everything, it would make sense for that he could see everything, versus where a the Latter-day Saint conception of God is somehow embodied. How exactly that all works, we know that God's physically embodied. So how exactly he would be outside of time and space and observing everything is a bit more difficult. I guess you would say God is in a different time metric or space-time metric where he can observe all things past, present, future in regards to our universe, but somehow being causally related, but somehow outside of it, but still within some space-time metric. Blake actually talks a lot about this in his, I think, it's chapter 10 of his book, Attributes of God. I'm not sure, but he has several chapters on space and time where he goes into this in some good detail. And I think that his model is consistent with either view.
And
I
I
mean,
think like a,
let me just say, the philosophy of space and time is very difficult. So that's but straightforwardly, if God's seeing the future or God knows the future, then the B theory would have to be right.
and that's something I usually bring up, like say some of my fellow LDS are critical of open theism. Is like, like you have to accept like some type of B determinism, and they don't like it, but at least you're willing to like bite the bullet on that one. At
Yeah,
least you're consistent.
I would say though that most Latter-day Saint, at least philosophers and theologians, are probably open theists. So that's hence the A theory.
Yeah, but like I'm sure like you kind of touched upon this, but like I'm sure some will actually wonder about this. Like when it say in the scriptures, like say God changing his mind or petitionary prayer affecting God's plan, like I think like say Moses in Exodus 32 and 33. Body's red hot anger in the original language text. Moses intercedes and like he spares some of the Israelites and other instances where like at least on the prima facie reading the text, it seems like God can be moved, and so forth. How would you approach that? Like, do you believe it's only anthropomorphic language, like an anthropomorphism, and should not be taken at face value, or some of these scriptural passages or narratives?
I don't think that your view of time necessarily affects those scriptures. You could be affected at that part of the space-time metric just fine without affirming A or B. I think that's fine. I personally, I do think that the scriptures use very heavily anthropomorphic language about God to make God make sense to the finite mind, which makes a lot of it makes more sense than I guess the way if you were just talking to a theologian for the most part. So, and I mean, as you well know, you've written about this by and large. The scriptures aren't books of theology; they're kind of stories of how God is related with human beings and things we can draw from them. So I wouldn't overlay too much with those. I think they're compatible with A or B, though.
No, that's good. I know we kind of gone through like say some of the softball questions. So like, do you have anything else you would like to add or like discuss in any detail?
Well, yeah, I think if you think that God, I mean, next to the nature of God, I think the nature of time is probably the hardest thing to work on. It's because it's so multifaceted. But you when you think about God, if you think that God knows all things, past, present, and future, then you would have to accept the B theory. But if there's another way of keeping the traditional attributes of God on the A theory, all you'd have to say is, at least there's two ways of doing this. One is to say, well, God has to know everything that exists, but since the future doesn't exist, it doesn't count against God's omnipotence that he doesn't know it. So there's no problem there. William Lane Craig, who is an atheist and mentioned him earlier, he actually does think that God knows the future. So there are people who believe that too. It's never exactly made sense to me that God could know what isn't there or what's going to happen.
Yeah,
And
Craig's view, as you know, is like it's kind of odd because he believes God
yes,
existed outside of time until he created, and now he's bound to time. But he's also a
yes, and he
modalist.
has a view of libertarian free will where he says that there's only one way that things can be, so he rejects the principle of alternative possibilities. So that kind of makes sense, but to me, that almost you're just a compatibilist at that point.
Yeah, it's like the Rick and Morty meme, like you're a compatibilist, but just with extra steps.
Yes, that's exactly what I think. Um, so I think that Craig is more of a calls himself a libertarian because of his Molinism, but his view of time now his work on philosophy of time I think is really good. I think it's some of his best work, but his view on free will and foreknowledge it seems a bit uh, tricky to me. I'll say that. But
Yeah,
I
I would agree. I've never been impressed.
but I think most Latter-day Saints sitting in the pews probably think God knows all things past, present, future, but they probably haven't thought about it the way and talked about it the way you and I have. So it's and Blake Ostler mentioned he thinks that Latter-day Saints are a lot less committal about whether God knows the future. So Bruce R. McConkie, who is obviously a very influential person, his view of time would basically view of God's knowledge would entail a B theory of time. Although even there, that's really strange because he thinks that God advanced just to come outside of time. I was like, no, I don't think that's possible. Like different time metric, okay, but out of time itself, that seems impossible. If God is, spatially, temporally located. So yeah.
We
So
actually
that's
have. Oh, go ahead.
good. I'm
Oh,
done.
we actually have two other submitted questions. So if you want to take these, Sue asks, how does all of this relate to the theory of the multiverse?
Straightforwardly, it doesn't. The you can believe in the multiverse in the A or the B theory. So straightforwardly, there's no thing there. If you certain multiverse theories, like the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that there's an infinite number of universes. Many of its proponents are also B theorists. So Sean Carroll, who is on my dissertation committee, friend of mine, uh, well-known physicist and philosopher at Johns Hopkins, he's a very strong proponent of B theory as well as many worlds. But straightforwardly, you can accept A or B and a multiverse.
Sure. And the other question is, with an LDS understanding of theosis under the B theory, would there have to be some kind of fundamental shift in how we perceive time as we become more like God?
In a way, yes, you would have to, because in a way you'd have to say that you are exalted already, but you're just not fully conscious of that along the timeline. But it does help with things like in the Doctrine and Covenants, where it seems as though the one thing about the B theory of time that does help it gives you a more adequate way of how you can explain the atonement. How does the atonement cover everything, past, present, and future? If the past isn't there anymore in the future, it can kind of that's how you can apply the atonement in any time in human history because it's always happened. So,
No, that's I won't debate you about atonement theories today, but yeah, that's good. So in terms of say
we
with the
actually,
other,
I think that's an area we both disagree with Blake Ostler, though.
yes, as much as I like Blake and I like his critiques of say penal substitution, I just don't believe in the compassion theory. I think there's loads of problems with that, and I know you would lean towards a penal substitution model, but
Well,
I think we would largely agree. Like we disagree with Blake.
I I think that let me say, and I don't want to go too deep into this. I think that the point of the atonement is, as Paul says, to Christ dying for our sins, and there does seem to be some type of transaction going on there. I don't know that you need to do the penal substitution model. I mean, that's just one option. But I do think I do believe in some type of substitution, whether it be penal or otherwise.
And I was just saying, like, that's not necessarily genitive price, but we can discuss that maybe at a different time.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Yeah. So in terms of say bibliography, like if someone wanted to delve more into say the A and B theories of time, like whether philosophical or scientific or theological or what have you, what are resources that you've actually found useful for
Good. I
entering?
you would ask me that question. So the very best place to start here with this book. It's called Time by Heather Dyke. It's only 70 pages. It will give you a very good overview and a great bibliography. So that's like a beginner's guide to space and time. The book Time by Jinan Ismail, a very short introduction. She also has a very good introduction. A more expansive introduction to time and space will be the book Time and Space by Barry Dainton. Let me think here. Another, like a good defense theologically, that where both the A and B theory of times are explained, but the A theory is especially dependent is it's by William Lane Craig. A Time and Eternity. That's the name of it. And so that's a good one. Blake's two chapters on time and the attributes of God. Very good. An introduction to the philosophy of time. That's a relatively new book. It's very good. Uh, some science books on it. There Sean Carroll has a book called From Eternity to Here. That's a good book of his where he defends the B theory of time, but he also talks about the special theory of relativity and general theory and gives you a very solid overview of that. It's my favorite book on the philosophy of time. It's very well done. He has another book. It's called Space, Time, and Motion, which will give you a very a good cursory overview, but it does involve some math, so buyer beware, of special and general relativity. So those are, I think, enough to cut your teeth on. And there are other more advanced books on philosophy, space, and time. Craig Callender has a very good book as well. So anything by Craig is good.
No, that's perfect. So before we like wrap the episode up, like, do you have any other final comments or issues you would like to raise?
No, but I hope that all of your listeners will take some time, no pun intended, to study time because it's very mind expanding and it's something that you think you know a lot about, and then you'll study it and you'll be like, oh, I really, really didn't understand half of what I just take for granted every day. So, and also, time is really fun. It's you will not be bored. You will be frustrated, but you will not be bored. So, it's a fun thing to study. It's then something to think about in your everyday life, and then how God relates to you in the universe and other things. It's a big assumption that we make about things that we don't examine. So I encourage people to take the time to study time.
The theory is true, they already have, right?
Yeah, well, they're yeah, they may have, I don't know.
Okay, well, thanks again, Tarik, for coming on. Definitely have to do the kinful of discourse podcast episode in the near future, so we should plan that soon. But if people wanted to get in contact with you, like, what would be the best way to do
My email is tariklacour@utexas.edu. So just shoot me an email there. You can find me on Twitter, at Air of Dennett. And then you can also find me on Facebook with my first and last name. Shoot me a message there. Always happy to talk about anything you want to talk about.
Well, until then, thanks for coming on the podcast, and hopefully we can have you soon. But until then, take care and all the best with
Yep.
your doctorate and all that jazz.
Yep. We look forward to talking about King Follett soon.
Okay, I think that went well. So
Good, and it didn't take too long.
no, I wanted like